Good evening. Excuse me. Good evening. Hanukkah Sameach. Chodesh Tov. It's the new month of Teves. It's the 7th night of Hanukkah. And it's New Year's Eve of the secular year. The solar year. Let's light up the darkness. Let's light it up. How's everybody doing? Great to be learning with you on New Year's Eve. As I mentioned on the page earlier today, Nina and I met on New Year's Eve. I'm so grateful to have bumped into her 28 years ago. Thank you, God. And may we be blessed to keep creating artistically and sharing Torah, God willing, to 120 and beyond. Tonight's episode of AT Daily is sponsored by our dear friend Rabbi Mendel Kalmanson, who says, "Dear Sal and Nina, keep up the tremendous work. Wishing you continued success above and beyond your imagination." Amen. Thank you so much, Rabbi Mendel. And in the merit of enabling us to share more Torah with more people around the world, may you and all your loved ones be showered in blessings. And we say amen. Who's in the house on New Year's Eve? Yehudit in South Carolina, Joseph in Englewood, Joe in the Inland Empire, Bill in Missouri, Guy in Ohio, Shandora in the Bronx, Melissa in Great Neck, Bell in Texas, Renee in Indiana, Tracy saying Happy Hanukkah, Sharon in New Jersey, Lorraine in Texas, Chaim in Florida, Ella in Southern California, Marjorie in Georgia, Marie in New York. Welcome, everybody. Let's get into it. Beautiful daf. Just a little heads up. Tomorrow, New Year's Day, regular time, 6 p.m. Pacific. Thursday, Nina and I have an event that we have to go to in the evening. So Thursday, class will be at noon Pacific. And then Friday is the regular Friday time, which in the winter is 11:30 a.m. Pacific, because Shabbos comes in early on the East Coast. So tomorrow night, 6 p.m. Pacific, Thursday, noon Pacific. Okay, and we'll publish that on the Facebook page. Our daf tonight is page 14 here in Tractate Sanhedrin, the 24th volume of the Talmud, continuing our discussion of Mishnah number 1, the composition of various courts for different kinds of matters that come before a rabbinic court, i.e. how many judges are required to judge various matters. We picked this up about, just a little bit of the way into page 14a, relatively near the top. Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi says, there is no ordination outside of Eretz Yisrael. That's how you know that when we're talking about ordination, semicha, right, appointing new rabbis, when we're talking about here in the Gemara, we're not talking about just creating rabbis in the modern sense, because many rabbis are ordained outside of Israel. But what we're talking about here is sages. How were sages appointed, elders at the level of members of the Sanhedrin? Okay. So says Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi, there is no ordination outside of the land of Israel. So the Gemara asks, what is the meaning of there is no ordination? If we say that they may not adjudicate cases involving laws of fines at all outside of the land of Israel, well, that is difficult. We've already seen a bunch of cases where they, of course, rule on these kinds of matters outside of Israel, particularly in Bavel. This is the Talmud Bavli. There were many sages teaching, learning, and adjudicating cases outside of Israel, particularly in Bavel. So what are we saying? Didn't we learn in a Mishna, Tractate Makos 7a, that the Sanhedrin and its authority functions both in the land of Israel and outside the land of Israel? So rather, the intention is that we do not ordain judges outside of Eretz Yisrael. They can go and rule and adjudicate cases outside of Israel, but their ordination has to be inside the land of Israel. Now, the Gemara comments, it is obvious that if those ordaining the new judges were outside of Eretz Yisrael, and those being ordained were inside Eretz Yisrael, we say that they may not perform the ordination. But if those ordaining the new judges were inside Eretz Yisrael, and those being ordained were outside of Eretz Yisrael, then what is the law? May ordination be conferred from a distance in this situation? Spoiler alert, ordination may be confirmed from a distance when the one doing the ordaining and the one being ordained are both in Eretz Yisrael, but they don't have to be in the same place. They can do it with a messenger, publicize that so-and-so has been ordained, even if they're not in the same room, in the same spot together. But what about if the one being ordained is outside Eretz Yisrael? Can he be ordained? And the Gemara clarifies, come and hear a resolution to this dilemma from the fact that Rabbi Yochanan was distressed concerning Rav Shemin bar Abba, as the latter was not with the other sages at the time that they received the consent of the Nasi, the head of the Sanhedrin, so that Rabbi Yochanan could ordain him. In addition, concerning Rabbi Shimon ben Zerud and one who was with him, and the Gemara interrupts and says, who was he, the one who was with Rabbi Shimon ben Zerud? Who was the one with him? And the Gemara answers, Rabbi Yochanan ben Achmai. And some say that it was Rabbi Yochanan ben Achmai and one who was with him. So the Gemara interrupts again. Well, who is he, the one that was with him? Well, that's Rabbi Shimon ben Zerud. So the Gemara now continues. Although these two sages were equal in stature, the sages ordained only the one who was with them in the land of Israel at the time of the ordination, and they did not ordain the other one who was not with them. And this indicates that ordination can be granted only in Eretz Yisrael. The one ordaining and the one being ordained must both be in the land of Israel. Now, the Gemara relates several other incidents with regard to ordination. So Rabbi Yochanan persistently tried to ordain Rabbi Hanina and Rabbi Hoshaya, as they were scholars and righteous people. But he was not successful with regard to the matter, as various incidents repeatedly interfered with his plan, and he was very distressed about this. Stuff kept happening and getting in the way of his plan to ordain these very learned and upright rabbis to make them into sages. And he was distressed. And they said to him, do not be distressed, our master, as we come from, meaning we are descendants of, the house of the high priest Eli. Now this is going way back, right? Eli, the one who was the high priest at the time that Hannah, was barren and was not able to have a child, and her co-wife Penina had like 10 kids, and she kept complaining to her husband, that she wants to have a child and she can't have a child. She said, "Wait, what can I do about it? I love you. It's not in my power." Similar to what Yaakov said to Rachel. And she prayed and prayed and prayed, right? And the high priest, and she went to Jerusalem, or I think maybe at that time it was to Shiloh, where the Mishkan was at that time. This was before Jerusalem was the seat of the temple. And the high priest, Eli, saw her praying, like moving her lips, and he thought she was drunk. And she said, "No, I'm not drunk. I'm a desperate woman. I'm a, emotionally wrought woman praying for a child." And he said, and from her, we learn how to pray silently, but with our lips moving and mouthing the words. And she was rewarded, and she made a deal with God, right? "If you'll grant me a child, I will consecrate him to your service all the days of his life." And she was rewarded with that child. And who was that child? Shmuel, the prophet Samuel, right? Now, the high priest in that story, Eli, very righteous man. Sadly, his sons were not. They were somewhat corrupt, and they were selling favors, as it were, from the priesthood, and that went very bad for that family. And so there was this tradition that the descendants of the house of Eli would die young and would not be elevated to positions of great honor. And so that's what this Rabbi Hanina and Rabbi Hoshai are saying to Rabbi Yochanan. Don't be distressed that you're not able to elevate us to the level of the Sanhedrin. We're descendants of the house of Eli. As Rabbi Shmuel Bar Nachman says, that Rabbi Yonasan says, from where is it known that there are not to be ordained sages from the house of Eli? As it is stated with regard to the house of Eli, "And there shall not be an elder in your house forever." That's from 1 Samuel 2:32. So the Gemara explains what is the meaning of elder in this verse. If we say it means an actual elder, meaning an old person, but isn't it already written in the next verse? "And all those raised in your house shall die young men." Rather, the term elder is an honorary term for a sage, and it means that ordination will not be granted to descendants of the house of Eli. Now, the Gemara relates Rabbi Zeira, and by the way, this is, 1,000 years later than when this curse was brought down on the sons of Eli. 1,000 years later. So not only was, a curse still in place, but these men also knew that they were descendants of Eli. Very impressive. Where are we? Okay, so the Gemara relates Rabbi Zeira. So now another story, a different story, unrelated to that one, but still on the subject of ordination. The Gemara relates Rabbi Zeira would habitually hide himself so that they would not ordain him. He was running from honor. And he did this due to the fact that Rabbi Elazar said, "Always be obscure and remain alive." Meaning, the more humble and unknown you make yourself, the longer you will live. When he heard that which Rabbi Elazar also said, that a person excuse me. Okay, then Rabbi Zeira heard another saying of Rabbi Elazar. Namely, a person does not rise to greatness unless all his sins are forgiven. So then he understood that there are benefits to greatness. And he presented himself to the Nasi in order that he would be ordained. Right? So what Rabbi Zeira heard, to make that clear, right, a person does not rise to greatness unless his sins are forgiven. Meaning that if he actually attains that greatness, doesn't mean he's free of sin, but it means that his sins will be overlooked by the heavenly court, so that, he can accomplish greater, this is how I'm interpreting, so that he can accomplish much good in the world. With that greatness, somebody like Rabbi Zeira is able to do tremendous good in the world and have tremendous impact. So his sins will be overlooked so that he can now operate at this higher level, right? Join the major leagues, as it were. Now the Gemara relates, when they ordained Rabbi Zeira, the sages who were present at the ceremony sang to him this paean. Am I pronouncing that word right? That's one of those words I've seen, and I don't know if I've pronounced it right. P-A-E-A-N. I think that's pronounced paean, right? So like verses of praise. So they sang to him this paean of praise, traditionally sung to a bride at her wedding. Right? They were saying about Rabbi Zeira, but they were saying metaphorically about Rabbi Zeira, but it's normally sung to a bride at her wedding. And it goes like this. She wears no blue eyeshadow and no rouge on her face and no hair dye. And nonetheless, she radiates grace. The bride is described as being so beautiful that she does not need any cosmetics or adornments. And metaphorically, Rabbi Zeira is praised as exceptionally and recognizably qualified for his appointment. And similarly, when they ordained Rabbi Ami and Rabbi Asi, they sang to them a different paean of praise, namely, anyone like these, ordain for us, as they epitomize the ideal candidate for ordination. But do not ordain for us. And then in English, this doesn't rhyme, right? So in English, but do not ordain for us those counted among the rags or among the distorters. And some say, do not ordain for us those counted among the robbers or among the tramplers. But in Aramaic, misarmitin, misarmisin, mechamisin, and miturmisin. Right? So all these words have a nice, melodic rhythm and very similar sounds. Since the songs composed for various sages were mentioned, the Gemara also recounts that when Rabbi Abahu would come from the yeshiva to the house of the emperor, and if we're talking about Rabbi Abahu, I think we're talking about, right, probably Rabbi Abahu, not Rav, right? Usually the sages who are operating in Bavel are known as Rav, like Rav Yehuda. So I'm not sure about Rabbi Abahu because I don't think he's a Tana. I think he is an Amora, right, of the Mishnaic period. The Gemara period, but probably operating in Eretz Yisrael. And if so, then coming before the emperor, I'm just not sure if they're talking about the Roman emperor. You know what? It must be the Roman emperor because in Bavel, it was a king, right? King Shapur. But here, so he's coming before the Roman emperor, okay? So there were certain sages that were so respected that they would have an audience with the Roman emperor. So Rabbi Abahu is one of them. Rabbi Abahu would come from the yeshiva to the house of the emperor. When that would happen, the ladies from the emperor's house would go out and sing before him, O great one of his people, leader of his nation, illuminating candle, may your arrival be blessed in peace. And that concludes our discussion of ordination and how many judges are required for that. Back to our Mishnah number 1 here in chapter 1. The Mishnah teaches that the breaking of the heifer's neck is performed in front of a panel of 3 judges, and Rabbi Yehuda said there must be 5 judges. So as we mentioned a couple weeks ago when we started this Mishnah, breaking the heifer's neck, this is what we do when there's a murder mystery, right? So when a body turns up of a murder victim who's been killed between cities, so then judges have to come from Jerusalem and measure. Even if it's obvious, they still have to perform the measurement to determine which city is closest to where the body was found. And then the elders of that city are going to have to come out and say, we didn't kill this guy. Why would they have to say that? Why would we think that the elders of a city, the most respected individuals, who would suspect them of murdering this person who was found out there in the wilderness? Answer, maybe they're speaking on behalf of their city And okay, they didn't literally kill him, but maybe they should consider whether a stranger came to their city seeking lodging and protection and didn't get it, and that's why he was out on the road and vulnerable. That is not an explicit teaching in the Torah, but one I've heard a bunch of times. I don't remember the name of which rabbi who brought it down, but that concept. Okay, so the point is that you need judges, a panel of 3, and Rabbi Yehuda says a panel of 5, present to do the measurement. It's not enough to have a surveyor just come and report which city is closest to where the body was found. Judges have to come and supervise this. So the sages taught in a baraisa. The verse states, "And your elders and your judges shall go out, and they shall measure to the cities that are around the corpse." Deuteronomy 21:2. So your elders is in the plural, which indicates a minimum of 2. And your judges, this is also plural, indicating another 2, and a court may not be composed of an even number of judges, so they add an additional 1, and that's how you get 5. This is the statement of Rabbi Yehuda. Minority opinion. Rabbi Shimon says, your elders indicates 2, and as a court may not be composed of an even number of judges, they add an additional 1 to them, so there are 3 judges here. Okay, so what's the Gemara going to say? Well, what does Rabbi Shimon answer to Rabbi Yehuda, who said, well, it says judges and elders, so don't we need 2 of each, and therefore a court of 5 once we add an odd number? The Gemara asks, but according to Rabbi Shimon, what does he do with the extra expression, your judges? And the Gemara answers, he requires it to teach that these judges must be of the unique ones among your judges, meaning that they must be actual members of the Sanhedrin. The Gemara asks, and how does Rabbi Yehuda derive the law that the judges must be members of the Sanhedrin? He derives it from the fact that the verse did not merely state elders, but rather your elders, which indicates the elders that are unique to all of the Jewish people, meaning sages of the Sanhedrin. Okay, and how does Rabbi Shimon respond to this claim? He holds that had the verse written only elders, I would say that the verse is referring to any elders in the marketplace who are not members of the Sanhedrin. Therefore, the merciful one writes, your elders. And if it was written, your elders, I would say that it is referring to members of a lesser Sanhedrin. Therefore, the merciful one writes, and your judges, to indicate that they must be of the unique ones among your judges. And how would Rabbi Yehuda respond to this claim? He learns it by means of a verbal analogy from the word elders written in the verse, and the word elders written in the verse in Leviticus 4:15, and the elders of the congregation shall lay their hands on the head of the bull, which we already covered, when the Sanhedrin issues an erroneous ruling and people follow it, so everyone is, committing a transgression, and they have to bring an atonement on behalf of the people, and their elders have to lay their hands on that sacrificial bull. So, just as there, it is referring to the unique ones of the congregation, so too, here, it is referring to the unique ones among your elders. The Gemara asks, if he learns this verbal analogy, he should learn all of it, i.e. the entire law, including the number of judges as well as their rank. From there, i.e. the verse in Leviticus. And if so, why do I need the extra expressions, your elders and your judges? If we're learning it out from the case of laying hands on the bull, we already know it's going to be 3. So why do we have 2 extra expressions, elders and judges, over here? Rather, certainly, he does not accept this verbal analogy. Rather, he holds that the extra letter vav, corresponding to the word and, at the beginning of, when you have a prefix va, that means and in Hebrew, in the expression and your judges, v'shoftecha, your and your judges. So why is that vav there? It's there for the tally, meaning that the expression your judges teaches that they must be members of the great Sanhedrin, and the additional vav serves to add an additional 2 to the number of judges. Okay, so how does Rabbi Shimon respond to that? He does not expound the additional letter vav. He says that's not free for deriving number of judges. That's just speaking the language of people. The Gemara asks, if that is so, if the verbs in the plural form are each understood as adding additional judges, then the expression, and they shall go out, in the continuation of the verse of Deuteronomy 21:2, that would indicate another 2, and the expression, and they shall measure, That would be another 2 judges, meaning that according to Rabbi Yehuda, there should be 9 judges. And according to Rabbi Shimon, there should be 7. The Gemara answers, he needs this exposition for that which is taught in a baraisa. The verse states, and they shall go out, to emphasize that they must go out. They must go out, they and not their agents. And the verse states, and they shall measure, to teach that this measurement is itself a mitzvah, such that even if the corpse is found clearly close to the city, so that there is no need to measure in order to determine the closest city, nevertheless, they must involve themselves with the measurement to perform that mitzvah. Now we're on page 14b. Now, the Gemara comments, the Mishnah is not in accordance with the opinion of this Tana, as it is taught in a baraisa that Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov says, with regard to the breaking of the neck of the heifer, that once they measure which is the city and the elders come out and recite the words I mentioned earlier, then they complete that ritual by, bringing out a sacrificial cow and breaking its neck. So regarding this, with regard to the breaking of the neck of the heifer, the verse Deuteronomy 21:2 states, and your elders and your judges shall go out. So says Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, your elders, this is referring to the Sanhedrin. And your judges, this is referring to the king and the high priest. The Bryce explains the assertion that the king is called a judge. As it is written, the king, by justice, establishes the land, Proverbs 29:4. And the high priest, the Kohen Gadol, is also called a judge. As it is written, and you shall come to the priests, the Levites, and to the judge that will be in those days, Deuteronomy 17:9. And this refers to the high priest. So according to Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, when you find this, murder victim, unsolved murder, somewhere outside of any city, and you measure to the closest city, okay, who's getting involved in that? Judges of the Sanhedrin have to come out and deal with that. But not only judges of the Sanhedrin from Jerusalem, also the king and the high priest. This is not a crazy teaching, because the idea that the Holy Land will not tolerate blood, right? It will not tolerate blood. And by that means unjustly spilled blood. So when there is corruption, particularly corruption that leads to murder, then, the whole presence of the people on the land becomes shaky. Obviously, if people are being executed because they committed murder, or if there's a defensive war going on because the children of Israel are being attacked in the land, that's not murder, right? That is justified killing to defend Torah and the presence of the Jews in the land. But, when there's an unsolved murder, that's bad for everybody. And so according to Eliezer ben Yaakov, it's so bad that the king and the high priest have to involve themselves in this ritual to make an atonement and sort of bring the land sort of to peace. Now, a dilemma was raised before the sages. Does Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov disagree with the Tanaim of our Mishnah only with regard to one matter, or does he disagree with regard to 2 matters? Meaning, does he disagree only with regard to the requirement for the king and the high priest to participate in the measurement, but with regard to the Sanhedrin, he holds either in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, 5 judges are needed, or the opinion of Rabbi Shimon, that 3 judges are needed? Or perhaps he disagrees with regard to the Sanhedrin too, as he says we require all the members of the Sanhedrin to participate. If you're going to bring the king and the high priest, might as well have the entire Sanhedrin come, all 71 judges. Rav Yosef said, come in here a solution to this dilemma from a baraisa discussing the case of a rebellious elder. What is a rebellious elder? It's a sage who publicly teaches a law against the ruling of the Sanhedrin, of the great Sanhedrin. So if the rebellious elder found the members of the Sanhedrin in Beis Page, which is outside of Jerusalem, and he rebelled against them by rejecting their decision, one might have thought that his rebellion is deemed a rebellion and he will be liable to receive the death penalty if he instructs the public to follow his opinion against the ruling of the Sanhedrin. Therefore, the verse states, and you shall arise and go up to the place that the Lord your God shall choose, in Deuteronomy 17:8. And this teaches that the location determines the authority of the Sanhedrin. To a certain extent, this authority exists only when the Sanhedrin is situated in the chamber of hewn stone adjacent to the temple. In other words, if members of the Sanhedrin go out of Jerusalem and they issue a ruling about something, we're bound to follow that ruling. But if another member of the Sanhedrin says, you guys are wrong, and says so publicly, and even urges people listening to him to disregard this ruling that, some subset of the Sanhedrin made while they were outside of Jerusalem, this is bad. It's definitely bad, and this rebellious elder could easily be excommunicated. But he's not going to be liable to the death penalty unless the ruling that went out to the people is from the great Sanhedrin while they're in their chamber, known as the chamber of hewn stone, on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. That's an official ruling, right? And if some elder contradicts that publicly and tells people not to listen to it, then he's liable to the death penalty, but not for, just some other ruling of the great Sanhedrin that was made while members of the Sanhedrin are outside of Jerusalem. The Gemara clarifies this. In the case discussed in the Baraisa, how many members of the Sanhedrin went out to Beis Page? If we say that only some of them went out, well, then there is no significance in such a ruling issued by the rebellious elder, as perhaps those who are inside the chamber of hewn stone, who remain behind in Jerusalem, are the majority of the great Sanhedrin, and they actually hold in accordance with the opinion of this so-called rebellious elder, in which case he certainly would not be deemed a rebellious elder. Rather, for that case to even be worthy of discussion, it is obvious that the entire Sanhedrin went out. The great Sanhedrin, all 71 judges, went out of Jerusalem and issued some kind of a ruling. And then another sage said, no, those guys are wrong. Don't follow that ruling. So now it's him versus the entire great Sanhedrin. But the ruling of the great Sanhedrin was not given on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, it was given outside of Jerusalem. So now do we say that the rebellious elder is liable to the death penalty or not? If we say, so what they're going to now ask is, what are the circumstances of that situation, right? So rather it is obvious that they all went out. And for what reason did they go out? If we say that they went out for an optional matter, may they go out? But isn't it written, your navel is like a round goblet wherein no blended wine is lacking. This is from the Song of Songs 7:3, kind of romantic poetry. What does that have to do with the Sanhedrin? From which it is inferred that the Sanhedrin sit in a half circle, and there must never be more than 2/3 of them lacking. Right? The great Sanhedrin is not always meeting, but there always has to be at least 1/3 of them in that room or nearby, right? 1/3 of them have to be in Jerusalem. It can't be that the entire Sanhedrin has left. From which it is inferred that the Sanhedrin, so rather, since the Sanhedrin may not leave the chamber unnecessarily, it is obvious that they went out for a matter relating to a mitzvah. There are times when the entire great Sanhedrin has to leave the chamber of hewn stone and even leave Jerusalem. Why would they do that? Because it's obligatory. When is it obligatory for the entire great Sanhedrin to leave Jerusalem? What are the circumstances? Is it not that they went out to measure the distance between a murder victim and the nearest city in order to perform the ritual of breaking the neck of the heifer? And thus it is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, from which it can be deduced that in his view, we require all of the Sanhedrin to participate alongside the king and the kohen gadol in making the measurement of the corpse, the unknown corpse, to the nearest city. Now, that's not the law. That's Eliezer ben Yaakov's view. So according to this deduction is like, why would the entire Sanhedrin leave? Only to do this measurement of the corpse to the nearest city. But Abaye said to him, no, that cannot be proven from here, as perhaps it is a case where they went out to extend the city of Jerusalem or the courtyards of the temple. As we learned in our Mishnah, they may extend the city or the courtyards of the temple only in accordance with the ruling of a court of 71 judges. If they're going to change the boundaries of Jerusalem, that requires all 71 judges, and they might well have to be outside the boundaries in order to discuss where they're going to move the boundary to. That's a situation where you need all 71 members of the Sanhedrin outside of Jerusalem. No proof that even according to Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, it's to measure the distance between a corpse to a city. It is taught in a Baraisa in accordance with the opinion of Rav Yosef. If he found them in Beis Page, and the rebellious elder, if he found them in Beis Page and rebelled against them, such as in a situation where they went out to measure the distance between a murder victim and the nearest city, in order to perform the ceremony of the breaking of the neck of the heifer, or to extend the city or the courtyards, one might have thought that his rebellion is deemed a rebellion. Therefore, the verse states, and you shall arise and go up to that place. And you shall arise and go up to the place, which indicates that the location determines the authority of the Sanhedrin. And this proves that there is a Tana who maintains that all of the members of the Sanhedrin must participate in the measurement of the corpse to the nearest city. That's where we're going to leave off on that subject. But as we said, that's a minority view, and the law is 3 members of the Sanhedrin go out to do that measurement. New subject. The Mishnah teaches valuations of the fruits of a 4th-year sapling or valuation of second tithe produce. In cases where their value is not known, this is performed by 3 judges. Right? So 4th-year saplings, this is when their fruit is brought to Jerusalem, or second tithe produce. So somebody has second tithe, this is for him to eat when he goes up to Jerusalem for the festival. If he grows watermelons, he's not going to carry watermelons. So he's got to redeem the watermelons, turn them into money, and he can bind that money in his hand and use it for his food and drink needs during his pilgrimage to Jerusalem for Pesach or Shavuos or Sukkot. So the point is, if he's going to turn the value of the watermelons into money, you don't just do that by saying, well, watermelons right now, they're selling for, $2 a watermelon. I've got 5 watermelons, so that's $10. You don't do that. You actually, because this is a matter of holiness, of Kedusha, it has to be done with precision, and you're going to have to actually assemble a panel of 3 people who understand the value of watermelons, and it can opine, these watermelons, they're a little bit less than market value, so these are going to be worth, $1.53 per watermelon times 5. That's how much money you need to bind up in your hand. But it's done by 3, a panel of 3. Do they have to be members of the Sanhedrin? Let's keep reading. Okay, the sages taught in a Baraisa. What is the second tithe whose value is not known and requires a special court to assess it? This is fruit that has decomposed a little bit, and wine that has developed a film, and coins that have become rusted and cannot be traded at full value. Therefore, there is a need for an expert assessment. The sages taught in another Baraisa, the second tithe whose value is not known may be redeemed by 3 purchasers, i.e. experts in trade, but not by 3 ordinary people who are not purchasers. And this may be done even if one of them is a Gentile, and even if one of them is the owner. So you just need people who are expert in the value of that kind of produce. You don't need a judge. You certainly don't need a member of the Sanhedrin, but you can't just take anybody. You need somebody who has some knowledge about the value of that produce. Rabbi Yirmiyah asks, concerning 3 people who deposit their funds into one single purse, meaning they are partners in expenses and profits. What is the law? With regard to valuations, are they considered as 3 people or as 1? The Gemara answers, come and hear a solution to this matter from a Baraisa. And A man and his 2 wives may redeem produce of the second tithe where its value is unknown. So it is apparent that 3 partners are considered a court for this matter. Right? A man and his 2 wives doesn't get more, wrapped up together. Obviously, there's no objectivity as between them, a man and his 2 wives, and nonetheless, they can be considered a court of 3 just for the purpose of having knowledgeable people to assess the value of Meiser Sheni, of second tithe. Now, the Gemara rejects this proof. Perhaps this was a case of a marriage with special arrangements, such as that between Rav Papa and his wife, the daughter of Abba of Surah. Rav Papa and his wife handled their finances independently. She had her own property and was responsible for her own expenses. This is Rav Papa, who was such a tremendous sage, right, that whenever we finish a tractate, we recite the names of his 10 sons, because not only was he a great sage, but all 10 of his sons were sages. Incredibly successful family in terms of transmitting values to the next generation. And here we're hearing about Rav Papa's wife, that not only was, she a partner in transmitting this incredible transmission of values to the next generation, but she was also a businesswoman in her own right. New subject. The Mishna teaches, and I'm almost done. Questions or comments, please get them in now. The Mishnah teaches that the valuation of consecrated property is performed by 3 judges. And the Gemara comments, the Mishnah is not, so new idea, something that has been consecrated, right? Like you say, well, I don't own sheep, so this is obviously just a teaching example. I'm consecrating these 2 sheep of mine to the temple treasury, right? So now these sheep are not mine anymore. Now they belong to God. They belong to the temple treasury. I didn't consecrate them to bring them as offerings. I consecrated them as a donation to the temple treasury. Does the temple want my sheep? No, the temple doesn't want my sheep. Now that I have, consecrated them as a donation to the temple treasury, what we need to assess is what is the value, the monetary value of my sheep? And we'll give that amount of money to the temple treasury. This requires precision. So the valuation of consecrated property is performed by 3 judges. The Gemara comments, the Mishnah is not in accordance with the opinion of this Tana, as it is taught in a Baraisa. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov says, even a simple item such as a small fork of consecrated property requires a valuation by 10 people in order to redeem it. Eliezer ben Yaakov, very stringent his opinions. Rav Papa said to Abaye, granted, the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov can be understood, since what he says is in accordance with the opinion of Shmuel, the great sage Shmuel. This is not the prophet Shmuel. This is Shmuel, the sage, 1,000 years later than the prophet Shmuel. As Shmuel says, 10 priests are written in this Torah portion, meaning the word priest appears 10 times in the passage discussing consecrated property and redeeming consecrated property. You can see this in Leviticus chapter 27. So for each time the word priest is stated, a judge is added to the tally of judges of a court that must endorse the calculation of the redemption, leading to this total of 10 judges. But according to the opinion of the rabbis, meaning the majority who overrule Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, from where do they derive their requirement that we do this with a panel of 3 judges? And if you would say that the word priest is written with regard to them, i.e. with regard to the specific law of redeeming a consecrated animal, which can be generalized to any case of movable property, and only 3 times is priest mentioned in Leviticus 27 verses 11 and 12, well, then in a case of redeeming land, with regard to which the word priest is written 4 times in Leviticus 27 verses 14, 18, and 23, it should be enough to perform a valuation in a court of 4 judges. And if you would say, well, indeed, that is the case, well, then why did we learn in the Mishnah that the valuation of consecrated land is performed by 9 judges and 1 priest? When it comes to land, now we do have a panel of 10, and there are 9 judges and 1 priest. So why is it that with movable property, it suffices 3 judges? We could say there's logic to it, but what about a proof text from the Torah? What are you going to do? So rather, what would you say? That the count of 10 instances of the word priest written in the section is completed with these, meaning that there is a cumulative calculation of all mentions of the word since the beginning of the passage? Well, if so, concerning consecrated animals such as animals, given that a similar cumulative count of 6 is completed with them, they should require 6 judges to perform the valuation. And the Gemara concludes, indeed, the matter is difficult. The Gemara is not sure where the sages got that 3 judges rule on the valuation of consecrated animal or other movable property in order to turn it into money, right? Giving money to the temple and keeping the animals or other movable property. How do we know that it's 3? We don't. The Gemara it says the Gemara is perplexed. It's difficult. We don't have a proper proof text yet. Are we going to get it tomorrow? Stay tuned. You're going to take some questions. And reminder, tomorrow, regular time, 6 p.m. Pacific. Thursday, noon Pacific. Nina and I have an event Thursday evening. And Friday, regular Friday time in winter, 11:30 a.m. Pacific. Okay. Yosef says, I have prayed at the place where Hannah prayed. So powerful, and it worked for a blessing. Wow. Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that, Yosef. Renee. When I talked about the word, I pronounced it peon, but as a poem and songs of praise. Renee, I think, has the right answer for me. Peon, right? P-A-E-A-N, can also be spelled P-A-E-O-N. She says it's pronounced peon or peon. These are acceptable, not peon. Wait, I don't even know what I said, but peon or peon. This is getting funny. These are acceptable pronunciations. The first is used in song, peon, and the second in prosody. There's a great word. This is per Grammarist Essay Shark. Thank you, Renee. I guess I'll go with, peon for songs and peon for prosody. I'm going to have to look up what prosody means. And finally, a question regarding yesterday. Just somebody was asking, what is intercalation? Right, so intercalation is when we add a day to a Hebrew month and say that Rosh Chodesh, the beginning of the next month, comes a day later. Or when we add a month to the year, like when we add second Adar in a leap year in the Hebrew calendar, that's called intercalation. Right now, right, we're in Rosh Chodesh, celebrating the beginning of the Hebrew month of Teves, and this is the only time that Rosh Chodesh occurs within a festival. So in the middle of Hanukkah, we reach Rosh Chodesh. And it always happens beginning on the 6th night. Last night we started Rosh Chodesh, and it's a 2-day Rosh Chodesh. So Rosh Chodesh, the beginning of the new month, the consecration of the new month, the sanctification of the new month, sometimes is 2 days, sometimes is 1 day. Why would that be? Right? And it makes sense when you think about that in the old times, right? The Sanhedrin had a choice to make. That a month is going to be either 29 or 30 days long, right? So if normally it's 29 days, and then the 30th day is the first day of the next month. So that's Rosh Chodesh. But sometimes they intercalate the month and make the 30th day part of the old month, and then the next month begins on the 31st day, which is now the first day of the new month. So since that 30th day has the possibility of being sanctified as the first day of the next month, it has some holiness no matter what. Even if it's deemed the last day of the old month, it still has holiness. And that's why when we have a 2-day Rosh Chodesh, the first day of the Rosh Chodesh is actually the last day of the previous month. And the second day of Rosh Chodesh is actually the first day of the new month. And that's how that works. That's what I've got for us, and with God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow at 6 p.m. Pacific, when we'll be celebrating Zois Hanukkah. The 8th night of Hanukkah is also called Zois Hanukkah. This is Hanukkah, the 8th night when all the lights are lit. We'll be coming out of Rosh Chodesh, out of the 2-day Rosh Chodesh, which we're in the middle of right now. And it'll be, God willing, New Year's Day on the solar calendar. That's what I've got for us tonight. All the best, my holy sisters and brothers. Chodesh Tov, Chanukah Sameach, and Happy New Year.